In our English language, despite the richness of its vocabulary, there is one word which we use to express how we feel about a great variety of things: love. Now, we might say that we love ice cream, or McDonald's, or Mozart, or Southend United, or my iPhone. And we might say to someone, I love you. But a lover would never think of saying to the beloved, I love you as much as I love a Big Mac, or Southend United, or my phone. Words sometimes obscure the way we express different degrees of love. And sometimes we use words inappropriately. So whilst we might say that we love someone, we may possibly not like them, because like and love are essentially two different realities. Now, the classical languages have a much richer and nuanced way of expressing love. C.S. Lewis, in his book The Four Loves, describes affection, friendship, eros, and charity. The kind of love that the Christian is called to is agape love, or self-sacrificing love. It's the love which always puts the good of the other before myself, self-sacrifice in front of self-assertion, self-giving ahead of self-seeking. Agape is the word that St. Paul uses when writing in that letter to the Corinthians, the second reading of the Mass this weekend. And that passage of St. Paul to the Corinthians is so well known and so popular, of course, that 9 times out of 10 you'll hear it at a wedding, because it's Paul's great hymn of love. But whilst it might be very familiar, it's not all comfortable. We believe that there are 3 main virtues of what we call the theological virtues of the Christian life: faith, hope, and charity. And we say that these are virtues because, like any good habit, they have to be learnt and they have to be lived daily if we're going to become perfect and proficient in them. Furthermore, they've got very little to do with feelings and emotions, because those virtues are acts of the will. They're not acts of sentiment. They're not emotions. As I say, love and liking are 2 different realities. Love or charity is a good example of this. Its heart and its essence is sacrifice. This is why the central symbol of the Christian religion is the cross. Our God loved us to this extent that he would lay down his life on the cross. He sacrificed himself. Now, this is our model for loving also, that we can lay down on the cross for the sake of those that we love. Husbands and wives do this. Parents do this. Priests should do it. Every time we respond willingly to the needs of someone else, we do this. And in these small and often hidden sacrifices, love is made real and evident. Now, the radical element of the Christian religion is this central tenet of charity. If we desire always and only the good of the other, then every single act of our lives is marked in some manner by those attributes of love outlined by St. Paul. And sometimes we underestimate the power of good or bad in our lives, the good that we can do, the bad that we prevent, by living or not living according to this central principle of charity. Just as by one single word or action we can build up others, so also by a single word or action we can destroy others. Maybe hearing someone say once on a marriage preparation course, they'll say, for every negative comment you make to someone, for every negative word you offer, you've got to do 6 more positive things to compensate for it. Because we only hear negative things. If we criticize and express negativity, then that's what stays with us. That's why people go through their lives so often so wounded, because they've only heard negative things addressed to them by their parents or by their spouses, by their siblings. Now, a great deal of what Jesus said and did didn't please everyone all of the time. In fact, some of the harshest things Jesus says in the gospel are addressed to religious people, funnily enough. Sometimes they thought he was even mad, because he always challenges the human ego. Often the basic problem is our fearful ego, and the best defense is offense. The basic principle is, according to this philosophy of life, if you want to protect the ego and its prerogatives, you must oppress and demoralize those around you. The very subtle version of this method is to attack, to pull down, to insult, to undermine, to go for the weaknesses that we know in other people. It's the method of the bully, isn't it? But the religious version of this kind of treatment and behavior is much more subtle and therefore much more insidious and dangerous, because it takes the law itself, the law of God, God's word, especially his moral law, and then uses it to oppress and to accuse. So I know what's right and what's wrong. I know what the church expects of you and of me. And I know that you're not living it. You're not doing it. I think it's called taking the moral high ground, isn't it, sometimes? And so I accuse you. I gossip about you. I remind you of your inadequacies and your weak points. Now, there will be times, obviously, when it's necessary to correct others with kindness and charity. We call it fraternal correction, and it's done very rarely. But Jesus in his preaching and Paul in his eulogizing about love teaches us that we must never become a slave to the ego, but must strive to live at all times according to the demands of that agape love. Now, one of the great and small saints of the church is Thérèse of Lisieux. She had a great desire in her life to do something outstanding for God. She wanted to go overseas as a missionary. She thought she could be a martyr for Christ. And then one day she read St. Paul's letter, that hymn we've just heard, that hymn about love. And she says suddenly she woke up to the fact that this wasn't going to be her vocation. Her vocation was going to be love in the heart of the church. And she writes in her diary, her spiritual journal, that once she realized that love was her vocation in the church, everything else fell into place. She says, if the church is a body, it must have a heart, and a heart burning with love. I realized that this love was the true motive force which enabled the other members of the church to act. If it ceased to function, if the heart stopped beating, the apostles would forget to preach the gospel. The martyrs would refuse to shed their blood. Love is the vocation that includes all the others. Agape love, self-sacrificing love. And that's why there's only one rule, one law for all of the children of God, that we live by love, since love is what God is. And his love defines how we live and how we be. We've just heard in the gospel that when Jesus went to his own town to preach, he was rejected. But he was identified as the son of Mary and Joseph. And our one hope, our desire should be that we will always be identified as the children of God, that God who loves. And that's why we call Mary the mother of fair and beautiful hope and love, because God chose her for her unconditional love. She teaches us always that way to the love of the heart of God, the way to the love of the heart of her divine Son. Praise be Jesus Christ.